Welcome to the Hedron Icosa stream, where we'll take Hedron to the next level with DePaul University finance students. I'm honoured to be joined by Professor Lamont, Black and finance student Chad from DePaul University. We also have the founder of Hedron Icosa, Alex, ambassador of Hedron and Icosa, Sloth, and Hex and Pulse Chain OG and Crypto Ambassador Hodpril. Thank you all for being here.
No, thanks for having me.
Great to be here.
We're going to say... Yeah, you guys are all legends. There's been a lot of likes leading up to the stream. I stuffed the timing up initially, so apologies to everybody. But Dingo, you were first here. You didn't come into the green room for breakfast, though. I was disappointed. Next time. We have Academaciated. I could have said that better, but thanks for being here. My online ghost, what's good, everyone? JJ Crypto, Trip. Thank you all for being here. Post your questions. Tatum Risk, I hope you're still here. Sorry, bro. JJ Crypto, Red Squirrel, Oi Oi, Hexecutioner. Hello, everybody. All right, so let's get stuck in. So for the listeners that don't know, Professor Black's finance students were recently gifted Hex, PLS, PLSX, and Hex HSIs as part of a Pulse Chain pilot project. And now, Professor Lamont, do you mind to just introduce Chad for us?
Sure. Thanks for having us on, Claus. Good to see everybody, and looking forward to the discussion. So this is Chad, one of my students, and he's in the class. He's been involved in this pilot program working on Pulse Chain, and he expressed some interest. We've had some conversations after class, and I mentioned, well, I'm doing this stream. Any interest in joining? And so here he is. You want to say hello?
Hi, everyone. I'm a senior finance major at DePaul University, and just got introduced to Hex through Lamont in the past 2-3 weeks, and really sparked some light bulbs in my head. So I thought this would be fun.
Oh, it's so good that you're here, Chad. I think that's awesome. Awesome that you're on stream. So Chad, I'm just interested in like how it all went down with the, when the coins landed. Or tokens, I should say. So how did it all go down in class? Like, what were the reactions?
Well, it was when we got the coins, it was positive, right? Everyone's like, oh, we got 30 something worth of crypto just for free. I mean, that's nice. And the following weeks, we actually staked Hex and went through some assignments using Hedron and just got familiar with Hex.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah, I think it's amazing that it kind of the multi-send tool that we used was quite seamless. So I was pretty proud and happy with that. It didn't take too long, actually. The only thing that took a little bit of time was making the HSIs because they have an individual token ID that you put into the Excel before you load it in. So that took maybe an hour, but sending all the rest of the tokens is actually, once you've got the contract addresses lined up in the Excel, was actually super quick. So I was pretty stoked with how it all sort of went down. And then around the university, are people talking about Hex and Pulse Chain?
Well, we're definitely talking about it in the class, and I think because of the movie, that's definitely helped. I think DePaul, if you watch the trailer, DePaul University, our sign is right smack dab halfway through there, so it's kind of whoa, all right.
Love that.
And so I've played it for some of my other classes and other students, and I think people are excited to see it. And I think what's been great about the movie is just highlighting the debate around Hex and around the ecosystem and around Richard Hart, to be honest. And so, it's been fun to have those discussions with my students and see the different reactions. And that part of why I was, it was fun to bring Chad along is, I think he's kind of looked beyond some of the surface drama and said, okay, well, how does this actually work? What are some of the economics? And that's really my goal as an educator is to, I'm not a marketing professor, I'm a finance professor. So let's talk about what this thing actually does. And so I think he has found it interesting.
I love that. And so Chad, have you looked into the Hex, the layman's contract? Have you had a little peek in there?
I'm sorry?
Have you looked into the Hex contract, the white paper?
No, I haven't read the white paper, but in class, Professor Black has done pretty great job explaining how hex works, like involved with like the T-share mechanism and like what you're actually giving up when you stake hex in the trade-offs. There's some like debate and some like positive and negative views in the class of different students that they have on hex, but you know, without like promoting hex being like by this, Professor Black has done a good job explaining what hex is.
That's
Yeah, and
awesome.
I think the debate has been healthy because I mean, frankly, there are some students who think it's a total Ponzi scheme. As soon as the class is over, they're going to sell it, and so it's like, all right, that's cool. Like,
You know what? I'm actually proud that, you know, if there's one person that's thinking about not selling it, that would be like exceeding my expectations. Because I just remember going to the servo like in uni and being like, oh, I've got $10. Okay, I'll get $8 of fuel and I'll get like a $2 chocolate bar. So I totally get that.
Yeah.
And I think
I'll say this:
Go ahead.
if the students who want to sell it are able to like take it, use a DEX, put it into a stable or whatever, and then get it into their bank account, I think that's a huge success right there. Like they've kind of learned like the way to navigate on the blockchain and DeFi as a whole. So like, yeah, if they don't like it, they don't want to hold it, sell it, and they've gained the skill to be able to interact with the asset class as a whole, which I think is one of the goals of your course in the first place.
yeah, and I think what I appreciate about Chad, and part of why it's good that he's here, is I think, you know, for him, we've had a lot of conversations about like, what are you actually doing when you're staking? Why are you earning yield? Where is that yield coming from? And then what are you giving up when you stake? And I've really tried to emphasize like giving up that option to sell, giving up that liquidity. And I don't know if you remember, Alex, but there was a post, I think in August, where I had watched one of your videos and you had talked about like mining Bitcoin and then, you know, using Hex and minting Hex and using the smart contract. And there was just something about the way you had put it that really clicked for me. And so, you know, I feel like that's what I've brought into the classroom is trying to just help them understand the economics of this and what that trade-off is.
Mm-hmm.
All right, team. Alex is here and the chat is excited. So yeah, Chad, you've done well, man, coming on stream. So you can sit back for like some of this stuff, but also at the same time, I'd like you, if you want to ask questions, to do that as well. So we're going to deep dive into Hedron, and we'll start slow and then we'll rapidly deep dive because the community, everybody is like a fangirl and a fanboy of Alex. So the fact that we've got Alex on stream, we're gonna hear what he has to say about Hedron, and we'll tie it back into traditional finance as well. So for the first question, so just to start us off, Alex, can you please tell us why Hedron was created and take us through some of the functionality, please?
The biggest reason Hedron was created was for the HSI. That was like the original core idea of you being able to take this hex stake that you can't do anything with, and then potentially do something with, and it may be at a premium or a discount, but it kind of creates this secondary bond-like market for the hex stake itself. And then the Hedron token is kind of symbolic of coupon payments. So it's not exact, but it's kind of that direction. And that was the first piece of it. You know, and then obviously Icosa came later, and that was about kind of trying to create a market for those HSIs that was more in tune with the economics and less in tune with monkey pictures. I know a lot of people really want their monkey pictures, but you know, yeah.
Don't knock the monkey pictures, Alex. Hey, by the way, talk about monkey pictures with the Wattses. Are we going to have any of those juicy NFTs?
Yeah, so there were a couple people who put together a big list of generated art, and I have all that, and they're ready, for the most part, ready to go. So that's coming.
Yeah, sorry to derail you. So we'll get back to 101 Hedron. So like the four parts, like the minted shares, the borrowing. Do you want to just give like a framework for Chad, just so he has those big headings in his mind, and then we can run through each and maybe the scarcity model as well?
Sure. So with Hedron, there's a certain amount. It's based upon T shares of the HSI, the hex stake, and basically this concept of like it's like T shares are a fixed thing that doesn't change within the stake, and it's representation of how long you did it and how much you staked. It's a good representation of that. So Hedron allows you to mint a certain amount of Hedron per day based upon that the amount of T shares a stake has. And you can only do it while the stake is got time to serve. Once it runs out of days, then it also runs out of Hedron. And it kind of gives you two choices. Like, well, you can mint this as it accumulates, or you can borrow it all right now. And if you borrow it all right now, there's a repayment mechanism that has to happen. And if that doesn't happen, then it'll go into an auction system. And people bid with their Hedron that they have, and highest bidder gets ownership of the stake.
Awesome. So do you want to take Chad through some of the nuance? Because I know that obviously we've got Ethereum and we've got Pulse Chain, and you can only borrow with HSIs. Do you want to just go through the difference between Hedron, how it acts with like a native stake versus a HSI stake?
Yeah. So in order for borrowing to work and having like the ability to like reclaim collateral, you can't have a normal hex stake. It has to be an HSI, and the reason being is those original hex stakes are immovable, and HSIs you're able to add some conditions to them so that they can't be moved. So that's really the only difference, technically speaking, is like why there's a difference between native and HSIs, just because of the mechanisms in which they're created. But like as far as actual performance, they both perform exactly the same. Just one has some additional features.
Yeah, awesome. So what we might do is ask Professor Black how to tie this back into traditional finance. So Professor Black, in traditional finance, are there any financial products that are similar to HSIs?
Yeah, I think what was nice about doing this exercise with the students, so first of all, they were given HSIs, but then I also had them generate their own HSIs. So they had to actually make a decision about how much to stake, how long to stake. I think those two decisions are really a great way to interact and think about the smart contract. But then the HSIs led us into a good conversation about non-fungible tokens, and like Alex was saying, like the transferability, to be able to sell it from one person to another. I get a lot of posts or comments about whether that undoes the game mechanics of hex. I know there's some debate within the community about that. My personal view is, it's the impact of the market. It doesn't really matter who owns the stake. It's not undoing the stake itself. So that's typically how I've responded to that. But it does create a market, these HSIs, the ability to buy or sell them on auction. And I think Chad and I'll ask him, see if he has thoughts on this. We've talked about, I think you even referred to it as like a bond market, right?
Yeah.
You want to say something about that?
I mean, when I was just looking at Hedron, like I thought of immediately in traditional finance, how you have a bond market and that these are secondary markets where people essentially trade back and forth and sell back and forth. Whereas Hex, you're just staked in and can't really do anything with that.
Yeah, and I think what's interesting about an HSI, another thing that makes it similar to a bond, is bonds are very unique in the sense of they have different maturities, they have different coupon rates, and so it's very different than investing in a stock because you own one share of Apple, you own another, they're interchangeable. So stock is more fungible, typically more liquid in that way, whereas bonds, because they're each different. They also have different origination dates, just like HSIs. So get that T-share price, that's going to be different. That's going to be also, similar for the bond market. And also the value of bonds are going to change over time. And so what I like about, having this idea of a secondary market is those valuations are going to reflect market demand, just like you would see in a traditional market.
That's awesome. Okay, Sloth, here's your question. Can you please tell us about Icosa and take us through some of its functionality, please?
Yeah, sure. So Icosa is kind of like the second half to Icosa Hedron. We were talking about it in the green rooms, like Icosa Hedron, put it on a flat surface, you got an outline of a hex kind of thing. And I think Alex did a good job of highlighting like two really important features of Hedron that exemplify kind of the purpose of Icosa to a degree. And that is like the distribution model of Hedron and then like the redeemability of Hedron. So the distribution model of Hedron is based on the T-share. So every T-share that you have, you commit 1,000 Hedron per day, or every one B share that you have, you commit 1 Hedron per day. So the inflation of the token is intrinsically tied to like the deflationary nature of the T-share. Just because it gets harder and harder to accumulate T-shares over time. Therefore, over time, it gets harder and harder to mint Hedron. But also, the other half of that coin is that Hedron is potentially redeemable for T-shares through the HSI auction house. And in crypto, a lot of the value that we see is derived from the exchangeability of assets within a liquidity pool. And this is a really good instance of a token that is exchangeable for another crypto asset outside of a liquidity pool while maintaining that connection of redeemability. So the Hedron token is derived from the B share or the T share and is redeemable for the T share. And so that in a way makes it almost like an abstracted version of a T share, just in the ERC20 format or a PRC20 format. Now, there was a criticism of this where if the token itself didn't have any dollar value or a high enough price, no one is going to be incentivized to take out these loans. And if no one's incentivized to take out the loans, you lose 1/2 of that value proposition of the token. Because if there's no HSIs in the liquidation auction, there's no redeemability with that Hedron token. So the only tying factor you have is the inflation model. Icosa is like a secondary incentivization protocol on top of the Hedron protocol that gives another avenue or another incentive to be able to send HSIs to the liquidation auction to give Hedron its redeemability value. So just like with Hedron, its distribution model is tied to the T-share in the same way Icosa is too. But instead of minting Hedron every day, with Icosa, you can mint it via its inflationary functions based on the amount of borrowable Hedron that is within an HSI stake. So you already have to send an HSI stake to it. You can't do it with a native one. And so the more borrowable Hedron you have, the more Icosa you get. But that function is also divided by the T-share rate itself. So not only does it get harder to accumulate these T-shares, but as the T-share rate goes up, which is a natural function of the Hex ecosystem, the amount of Icosa tokens you get also decreases as well. So that's like the inflationary part. That's the distribution model of Icosa that's tied to it, while allowing you to exchange your T-shares for Icosa directly. And then it's also a staking platform as well, where you can stake your Icosa or Hedron and earn more Icosa inflation over time. So if you stake Icosa, you earn Icosa and Hedron. The Icosa comes from inflation, very similar to Hedron and Hex. But also you earn Hedron, and that Hedron comes from the HSIs that are sent to the liquidation auction contract. The way they get on the auction is the same way that other HSIs do. They take a loan against the Hedron, and then it allows it to be liquidated. That extra Hedron gets distributed to the Icosa stakers. And then if you stake your Hedron, you get some of that Icosa inflation as well. So it adds a little bit of like degen yield farming, crypto yield farming on top. But I guess it's also degen yield farming too. I'm a little too into all of the yield farms on Pulse Chain right now, but it's a little bit of DeFi yield farming on top of this secondary kind of distressed asset bond market in a way with the liquidation auctions. And Icosa is like that incentive token that's used in order to confer value to the people who are performing the actions that are incentivizing, providing value for the entire system. And there are some really cool dynamics in terms of arbitrage opportunities that are hard coded into these contracts based on the redeemability functions that like I kind of outlined and Alex just outlined as well.
Good stuff, Sloth. So Chad, I'm just going to summarize that for you, what Alex and Sloth basically said. So on the Hedron side, you've got mintable shares. So you get free Hedron basically when you make a hex stake. So you don't have to do anything else except for make a hex stake, and you get free Hedron. So no downside there. And then you've got the borrowable shares. So you can borrow against your future Hedron that you would accumulate if you waited throughout the stake. So mintable shares, borrowable shares, and the liquidation marketplace. So if you do happen to default on a loan, and then there's a liquidation that happens, then there's basically a marketplace for those HSIs that people couldn't pay back their loan. So that HSI went to auction, and then the Hedron that was a part of that HSI that was left over got burnt. So that's the Hedron side. And then when Icosa was made, there's obviously like game theory on game theory, but then you can stake the Hedron. And when you stake the Hedron, you get Icosa. And then you can stake the Icosa. And when you stake Icosa, you get more Icosa and Hedron. And then in addition to all that, there's the HSI buyback. So Alex, how did I go with my little summary there? You can probably summarize the two a lot better.
No, I mean, I think that was pretty good. Yeah. I mean, we've hit all the main points on how they function for sure.
So we are up to Hodpril's question, and then we're going to circle back to Alex. So Hodpril, can you please tell us your experience using Hedron and Icosa?
Yeah, so I use Hedron and Icosa, and there are different main reasons to use them. And I know everyone else kind of gotten the grit of the functionality of it, but it's kind of like, well, you can. There are more things. There are multiple things you can do with it. You can just have Hedron. You can just have Icosa. You know, they have a value in and of themselves, and you can stake them. You stake Icosa for Icosa and Hedron yield, and then Hedron. You can stake Hedron as well, but you can also, from an HSI stake, borrow the Hedron. You can do the HSI buyback and get Icosa from there. I spent a lot of time on the auctions personally, because when Icosa, especially when Icosa first came out, a lot of people learned about the HSI buyback. And when you had the maximum 5,555 stake, you get kind of a bonus. So most people locked up a lot of hex. So this protocol locked up tons of hex for a very long time, and that helped reduce the supply, which is very bullish for hex. But then a lot of them ended up going to auction, and there's still some people still use the Icosa buyback. You can still go to the auction, and they're on both chains, right? There's the Pulse chain and the Ethereum chain. And so what I mostly do, I like using this functionality to get as many T-shares as I can. That's the way I use it. So I go to the auction and I try to get a good deal per T-share, right? And you pay in Hedron on these auctions. And, sometimes, like, I've done it on Thanksgiving, got a good deal, you know what I mean? Not to dox myself, I guess, but, you can go in and get a real discount per T-share. And it's different too, right? Because it's on the Ethereum and the Pulse chain side. So whenever you make a bid on the Ethereum, it costs more in gas, but that means there might be less bids. So there's a lot of weird game theory in the fun, when you're doing these auctions. So it's a lot of fun. I think it's a great tool to help you on your hex journey, and it's helped me a lot. I've gotten a lot more T-shares through these HSI auctions, through really the Icosa buyback. And a lot of the Hedron gets burned as well, and that pumps the price of Hedron and really pumps the price of anybody who stakes hex has borrowable Hedron, right? So it pumps the price for everybody. So I really like it. And I've read a book from some people who are in our community, some live stream. Vince and Cryptographics worked on this book, and it's Crypto Investing Practical Handbook.
Love it.
I love the cover. It's beautiful.
So
Cryptographics. Yeah,
and it was best-selling. It was a bestseller, wasn't it, Sloth, when it first came out?
Yep, it was number one on Amazon for a little bit there.
The smart contracts. It just goes through a lot of the stuff. It goes through Hedron, Hex, Icosa, HSIs. I think even
Yeah,
Roxas are
super
in
nice.
here.
And I know
that was a
Vince,
closed pool thing. It goes through
I
it.
love that. Guys, we've got a question here from Johnny Hex. How do I get rich? That's all I want to know. Team, answer, please. Help him.
Try to weather the storm of quantitative tightening and buy cheap stuff when it's over.
Yeah. Tell you what, John,
Maybe.
you send me 1 ETH, I'll send you 2. How's that sound? I'll help you get rich, buddy.
Johnny's got a good song though. You know that Go Johnny Go song? If it wouldn't pull my channel, I'd bring it up right now. I could sing it, but anyway, we'll move on. So Alex, before we go into version 2.0, is there anything you want to say about game theory? I know there's a lot of little bits of game theory scattered throughout the project. It's like little Alice in Wonderland rabbit holes. Do you want to take them down a little rabbit hole?
Sure. Try not to cross over into the V2 stuff, I guess.
Oh, we'll do V2 first, and then we'll do rabbit holes. Yeah,
okay,
let's go into V2
There's
question.
going to be a lot more rabbit holes with V2.
Let's add all the rabbit holes together and swish cheeses. So version 2 is coming out. So Alex, can you please take us through the changes?
Yeah, so it's not that there's anything particularly wrong with version 1, but obviously we have Pulse Chain come out. We now have 2 separate Hedrons, 2 separate Icosas. And I think the thing that first gave me the inclination that maybe this is a good idea is when Pulse Chain launched, the most common message I got was, hey, I bridged my Hedron to Pulse Chain and I can't use it to bid in the auctions. And that's because the Pulse Chain version and the Ethereum version are effectively 2 different things operating outside of each other. And, you know, I'm looking at this like, well, if this is kind of to be this secondary bond market for Hex, why should they be different? You know what I mean? Why should they have to have different use cases? At least the prices can still be different if people want it to be, but the use should be pretty similar. So the kind of core idea is that you'll be able to take your Ethereum Hedron, bridge it over the Pulse Chain bridge, and then use it on Pulse Chain just as if it was the native version. So you can stake it there, you can use it to bid on auctions there. You know, whatever the limits are for what you can do with Hedron on one chain, you can do on both, and vice versa. You can send it from Pulse Chain to Ethereum, same deal. So it kind of lowers this barrier of entry to a degree where you have to stop thinking about, okay, well, is that E-Hedron, is that P-Hedron, is that this, that, whatever. You get to make your own decisions on, you know, where do you want your stakes to be? Where do you want to bid on HSIs? And yeah, you have just kind of more freedom. There's some changes coming to the HSI itself with the HMI. Most of them are just quality of life stuff. So there'll be like multi-sig support. So if you want to have multiple wallets, have ownership, and you need like a 2 out of 3 sign to do something with it, you can do that. There's the ability for it to call arbitrary functions, which is something I wanted HSI to do in the beginning, but I cut because it has this kind of negative quality where if an HSI can call any smart contract with the few restrictions, then, you know, it opens this door to the potentiality of people to be scammed, right? Because, you know, but one of the most common things that happen in crypto is just the social engineering scamming, where you're like, hey, do this thing, this is how you fix this problem, and really they're just telling you, you know, how to lose all your money, and they'll take it. And that happens all the time. So I thought, well, we won't do this for HSI, we'll just seal this off, and, you know, if people want to do airdrops or whatever, you know, they'll support HSI. Well, it turned out no, they don't necessarily want to support HSI. So that feature will be introduced for what we're calling HMI, which is to upgrade the Hex mining instance, and that'll basically allow you to like interface with airdrops and stuff like that happen for Hex without, you know, without the people who are doing the airdrops have to do anything special for the Hedron people. So that's a piece of it. Icosa is getting some, bonus upgrades. There's some incentivization around auction timing that's changing. A lot of it's just small stuff, but the biggest thing is that cross-chain interoperability.
Do you want to go through? Yeah, go for it.
Just one follow-up question on the cross-chain interoperability. So I know there's been some discussion in the community about, with the launch of Pulse Chain, how now there's 2 hex, eHex and pHex, and you were talking about eHedron and pHedron. Do you think building that bridge and the convertibility, like I know there's sometimes some price differentials across chain, do you think that'll then reduce that price differential and make them more comparable across the two?
I think it will strengthen liquidity between the two, and I don't think they'll ever become comparable in exact price, but I think they're going to find their natural relativity, whether that's 10 to 1, 5 to 1, whatever that is. All this is really going to do, if it does anything at all for Hex itself, is it will make whatever bond they already have stronger.
So Alex, with the version 2, do you mind to go through with Icosa? So when you do the HSI buybacks, you've got like the bonus Icosa if Icosa hasn't reached its ceiling. Can you just take me through that?
On V2? Yeah.
So
with Hedron and Icosa V2, there's borrowing in V1 is fixed. It's based upon the amount that you would be able to mint in the future. Borrowing in V2 allows you to basically take leverage in exchange for repaying faster with more fees. So there is this ability. Currently, it's 10x, but I'm still testing to make sure that that's a good number. But I think it's a pretty good number. You can, if you're borrowing and maybe you've got some way of playing the auctions where you're like, okay, I can borrow and I can get this extra amount. Because if you ever look at the auctions go for way higher than borrowable amounts of Hedron. And that kind of creates this dynamic of somewhat borrowing's not that useful unless you have a lot of stakes. So the leverage system allows you to kind of circumvent that. And Icosa will use that to correct for price discrepancies. So in Icosa V2, when you're doing HSI buyback, if there is a discrepancy in price, basically what's going to happen is the contract will give you the amount of Icosa that it was going to give you, but also it will use the Hedron leverage system to gain extra Hedron. And with that will become pre-staked when you do this, but it will give that to you as well. So there's this incentive to, okay, the pricing doesn't necessarily make sense, but if I want to increase my Hedron stake exposure, I can do this, and it's effectively free.
That's awesome.
With the consequence that it's pushed out over time. But
Sloth, do you want to ask Alex some questions?
Do you want to ask Alex some questions? Oh man, okay, hold on, let me think.
I'll put you on the spot.
Yeah.
I know you're an Alex super fan, so I wanted to give you this moment, man. While I go through the chat.
Yeah. How much more thought have you been giving to the redeemability windows when we're migrating contracts?
That's probably my biggest thing at the moment. Making that as good as it possibly can be. Because one of the things I want to try to do, and it's not something I have to do or that anyone has to do. This could just be an airdrop at the end of the day, and maybe I'm internally debating maybe that just makes more sense. So I'm still in that stage of figuring out what makes the most sense. But obviously there's tax implications with airdrops, and so it's navigating what's the easiest way to get a group of people who want to use this new thing to use it, with implicating them as minimally tax wise, and having and also like not letting the system be super gamed, right? Because if you just say, okay, you can trade in Hedron for the new Hedron, and everyone just starts borrowing to trade in, it's like, okay, well, that'll happen. So, so it's like, there's some tact to have and some thought to put into it, but yeah, they're still flexible, but it's probably my biggest thing that I'm thinking about at the moment.
Yeah, that's something I gave some thought to as well, because the way it was set up in the official announcement that you had, I would have hated there to be a situation where there's like a definite window, and there were people who just like bought it, staked it, forgot about it, and just never came back. And then assuming everybody migrated over, all of a sudden they're left with these coins that have no liquidity and that aren't really being utilized by the community. Sure. And I was like, it's like, man, I would hate for people who like did like good behaviors of like setting it, forgetting it, and staking it to be punished in that way.
So I can say that if you have a stake currently and it was created before whenever this fork happens or whenever the new version happens, there is no time limit. As long as it was created and you have not added capital to it, as long as you've just kind of left it there from that time and it's before the launch date, it'll always be able to be transferred over.
So in addition to Watsa's too.
Same with Watsa. Watsa will always be able to be transferred over. HSI's made. I think HSIs are basically forever, but there's some technicalities on the amount of new Hedron it can mint if it's been if you've kind of like gamed the system and done both, so it'll kind of figure that out for you. So you might get penalized a bit there if you try to game it, but other than that, it's
Well, I do have another question, but actually it's for Chad, man. How much of this stuff is like stuff that you've already learned about looking into it versus like new stuff, and kind of where's your head at with all of this now, since you've been kind of newly exposed to Hex and you're kind of gone down like the next level of complexity down like the rabbit hole there?
Well, in class, we didn't really look that much into like Icosa and Hedron besides like the minting of your own HSI. So like everything you've talked about Icosa is all new right now. But actual like just Hex alone, we did take about like 3 weeks learning about that. So
gotcha. Nice. And like kind of from what we talked about, like where's your head at right now? Just curious. I'm always interested to learn, hear about like people's perspectives when they first hear about this stuff, because it's like so different than like what like you talk about in your day-to-day life.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like there's a lot of gaming to it. Just like looking around for opportunity to get more T-shares, essentially. So I mean, that I'm really not too familiar with the crypto community, so that could be like a really good thing for Hex and just getting more user engagement, I guess. But I haven't really made the connect. It's all new right now, so I haven't really made the connection to, this makes sense in like a TradFi sense.
Yeah, one of the last exercises I gave them with the minting of the HSIs is to, think about the amount. So they were granted 555.5 Hex class, and we did. One of the students is actually like, "Oh, it's like a meme," and so they're starting to.
There you go.
Now he's part of the community.
Yeah.
Don't worry about that. We got cute. PLSX 369 000.
But the assignment is then to think about, okay, of that liquid Hex, how much do you want to stake, and then how long do you want to stake? And I think what's going to be interesting for me is to treat that as data. Now that I've got about 30 students who have made this decision, I've got this little micro experiment of, having been exposed to this technology, how do they approach it? And I do think most of the students are, probably going to stake relatively short because, they're thinking about it as an activity within the class. I think some of them, when they think about staking long, they're attracted to that higher yield, and they think about, the longer pays better bonus. They're very aware of that. But I think they're also aware of like, well, if they put it in there and they forget about it, then, there's that grace period and there's good accounting, but they may not ever return to it. So I think they are starting to think strategically about, okay, how can I kind of stretch this out without kind of, getting myself in a situation where I forget about it entirely. And it kind of highlights, I think, how some of the students are responding to this new information, of just thinking about whether they want to view it as just an experiment or as a form of investment. And it's an interesting question for them, I think.
I think when Chad quits his job in the banking system and he comes over to full-time crypto, we'll know we don't need to do the pilot program anymore. We've done it. Hodful, do you want to ask a question before I go to chat questions?
Honestly, my question was similar to Sloth's question in that, and in other people's questions as well, is with the V2, the staking. Like, do you need to have the Icosa and the Hedron unstaked and liquid in order to transfer over? But I guess the answer is still kind of,
The answer is no. If you have it staked, you can just,
okay.
You don't even necessarily transfer it. You'll just be able to go in and say, basically claim your new stakes, and you'll have both.
Oh, cool. Yay. I'm happy about that. And that was the biggest question. I mean, other than that, I'm excited about V2 and it's great news.
Yeah.
All right, team. Go Sloth. We got 4 minutes.
One quick one for Alex, and I feel bad because I've been going on other streams and like teasing the rocket pool fork because I remember you like mentioning something before, but that's still on the docket, right? Like at some point in time.
I'm going to give you an indirect answer.
Okay.
So imagine Hex is a CD, right? And we kind of compare it to a CD. It's not really, but it's close. It's analogous to a degree. If Hex is a CD, what's the value of CD? Well, you lock up a bunch of money for a period of time, which helps with the stability of money, but also money has a use outside of it, right? So if more things come out that give more use outside of the thing, and you have these secondary markets for those things, you end up potentially creating a more stable system with a lot of levers, but ideally it all comes together in a way in which
that's all you gotta say, brother. I'm on the same page. I'm on the same page. I hear you. I hear you. That's all I wanted to hear, man. I got you. I'm picking up what you're putting
I'll
down.
replay it and then I'll ask my husband. Okay, so we're going to go to a couple of questions from chat. Here we go. So question, is the claimability of lots of Hedron by a few decreasing over time, i.e. big addresses with 5555s and 10x bonus is sort of price cap on Hedron, even on the long term? Why not? Thanks. I think I know what they're getting at. Do you understand you know what they're getting at, Alex?
I think I get it. They're talking about like,
initially how the OGs got to mint a ton, but it was because in retrospect, that's how much Hedron had accumulated up until that point. And there's like a exponentially decreasing model with how much they can't even mint out that much or buy that much that they've sold off probably now.
Yeah, I mean, most of those guys have honestly emergency end staked. So a good chunk of them are gone. So, but the big thing is like, you're kind of presented with this, like when Hedron launched, it had this thing where it's like, okay, we're going to let you mint, backlog mint, because Hedron came out like 2 years after Hex for you guys at the university, just so you have some context. It came out like 2 years after Hex. When it launched, it basically allowed them to backlog mint. So it said, okay, if you have a 555 stake that you created on day one on Hex, well, you're golden because you'll be able to backlog mint for those 2 years as if Hedron existed the whole time. You just didn't do it till today. So there were a lot of people up front who got massive amounts of Hedron and were like, thinking Hedron was like raining down like candy from the skies. And but it became very evident that the only reason they had that much is because it built up over 2 years. It just seemed like a lot immediately, because what had basically happened, it would be the same effect as if they had created a stake and then waited 2 years to start minting some of it. It had just accumulated. So there's this basically quality to Hedron that makes the supply of it that can come out over time decrease because stakes will end, and when they restake, they're going to get less T shares. And the more that it's harder to get T shares, the less and less Hedron that can be created from a stake. So it's kind of this like exponential downward curve of how much can be created at any given time. And I don't think that puts a price cap on it. I think if anything, that eliminates a price cap, right? Like you're sitting here, like there'll be a point where there's a 14-year-old stake that's in the auction. You know, hopefully we're all still around when that happens, but because I want to see it. But like there'll be a point where there's like a million hex 14-year-old stake showing up for auction, and at that point, I don't know what its yield's going to be, but it's going to be insane. And you know, what do you do in that time when the mintability is now 100x less on the Hedron side? You know, there's just simple math to me that's going to go for a lot, you know, assuming all this still exists in 14 years, but I'm hopeful that it will.
Yeah, so it's like Hedron, there's going to be like a, I don't know, I think there's going to be a run on Hedron eventually. It's just a matter of like when, because you obviously need Hedron for the auction. So
Well, the total supply hasn't massively changed, like increased in like, I don't know, a year.
Yeah,
maybe a little bit less than that.
It's
8
leveled
months.
out between like 100, about 11 to 13 trillion, like pretty steadily between those 2 trillions, and it blasted up to the first 100 trillion pretty quickly. So it's pretty it's slowed down a lot.
And there's obviously going to be that arbitrage opportunity because you can use your Hedron over on the Pulse chain side. So I think that looking into all the different arbitrage opportunities is going to be like Christmas, I think, initially, at least, until things level out.
Yeah.
We've got a cool question.
We're also, one of the parts I kind of didn't talk about a ton is, I won't get too specific because there's some details in this that I am not ready to share to the world, but
don't worry about that, Alex. You can share. It's okay.
But one of the other things is part of the Icosa V2 system is that it's going to help try to self-manage some liquidity pools on its own. So like when that contract launches, it's going to launch its own liquidity pool between Hedron and Icosa, and then there'll be all sorts of ways to obtain yield if you're a staker through that system.
Nice.
So there's like little bits and pieces of it that have just been added in that aren't so big on their own, but add up to, okay, well, let's say like, the market's down, liquidations have kind of dried up a little bit. Where's this, like, where's the incentive to do these things? Like, oh, okay, well, now it's from trading volume. Okay, well, now it's from, direct sales. So there's lots of bits and pieces.
Yeah, especially with Icosa staking, when you add that in, that yield was juicy. Thanks, man. Appreciate it. Love that. All right, we're going to wrap things up. There's one question from chat, and then I'll ask if anyone else has any questions, and then we'll sign out. So here we go. Naeem Z15. In the past, Alex perfectly explained how Richard Hart broke the paradigm and took mineability. That token mineability can be separate from network consensus. I don't know, Alex, you've got a great brain. Do you know what he's talking about?
Yeah, I think this is what we were talking about a bit earlier. But one of the ideas that Bitcoin's had has been ingrained in people's minds if they're heavily into Bitcoin has been like, you need to have the reward structure has to be tied to network security, right? Like that's the entire purpose. But I think like when we get things like Ethereum, and then Ethereum enables things like Hex to be built. Ethereum has its own method of chain security, right? So things like Hex don't need to care. They can just say, okay, well, we'll separate reward structures from network security, and that opens the door to a lot of flexibility, right? If you're not having to sit here, like as a programmer, if you're not having to ensure that your reward structure directly secures the thing, if you can just make the assumption that the thing you're creating is natively secure because the chain you're building on is secure, that abstraction enables a load more flexibility. And I think the fact that Hex did anything price-wise at all proves that the idea that you don't need network consensus security to be tied to the reward structure is true. Like it would, if it was false, it would have just immediately went down to 0. And there were other things similar to Hex that also tried to play a similar thing, like once Hex came out, right? And most of those went to 0, but it was for different reasons. But that there are this like ideas kind of being played with, and I think there's not a lot of people in crypto, unfortunately, who are coming at crypto from like any type of financial thinking. It's very much technological thinking. Like what's the new great technology I can build on this thing? And I think Hex is kind of a kick in the right direction of, hey, let's think about these things that we know that work and implement them. And they probably have to be a bit different because like the market is entirely different and the ecosystem in which we exist is different. But if we can take these ideas that we know already work and just do them here, and we can eliminate and we can just make them self-sufficient, right? We can eliminate companies and people and whatever, and just say, hey, here's some code I wrote. Use it if you like it. If you don't like it, don't use it. I don't really care. Like that's a super powerful, crazy thing, especially if you start combining it with like existing mechanisms that we know work in other parts of the market, right? And I think that's what Hex does really well.
Thank you. Professor Lamont, this is your cue to tell us about your new crypto project. I'm just pulling your leg. I know he doesn't have one.
You mean the Lamont coin?
You got me excited, Cos. I was like, wait.
When Lamont coin?
In my defense, there are some of my students and I have started just like you could say that Hedron and HSIs, like HSIs as like the tokenization of Hex stakes. So
have you tokenized your students?
Talk in TradFi about tokenization of real world assets. So I have students doing projects on what would it look like to do real estate title as an NFT. My area is in banking, and so I'm working on projects. What would it look like to do a traditional loan, like a car loan, but to tokenize that on a blockchain? So then you can have financial institutions that are now trading loans on a blockchain similar to HSIs, because that's what an NFT does, recording ownership, and then you can transfer it across different addresses. So I think there are a lot of very interesting use cases. A lot of this, unfortunately, crypto can become a little insular of we're just creating more and more projects for crypto on crypto on crypto. And so I'm excited about building that bridge between crypto and TradFi.
I think that people want to be able to use crypto to buy a house because you can get a tax-free loan using your crypto, and then you want to use that tax-free loan to then fund your real estate portfolio. So I think there is like a gap in the market, definitely for that.
Yeah, I think so. There's a lot of people talking about crypto as like a method of payment, but also crypto as an asset, like being able to treat it as collateral and borrowing against that for, other, even in fiat. But again, I think like things like Alex is doing and what other people are doing, it's like, what are the projects we can build on blockchain that aren't just, creating new relationships within crypto, but are creating these relationships across existing finance? Because
so what you're basically saying is like,
how do we create a bond market on blockchain? If we can do that with HSIs, we should be able to do that with traditional bonds as well.
So you're saying like, don't be so inbred. Like, is that what you're basically saying?
That was your word, not mine.
Yeah. What's funny is you could totally do it, right? You could totally just put a bond market on crypto tomorrow. We just need regulatory clarity. Like no one wants to touch it on that level. There's too much at risk to do it without some kind of clarity. So I hope that's something we get in the near future.
What are the steps to go forward in that regard, Alex? You think the outcome of the SEC case?
Which one? There's a lot.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there needs to be new legislation for crypto. I don't think anyone's against regulation. I think they don't want crypto to be classed as a security.
No, I mean, I
think
think
it needs separate legislation.
I think there's enough people who, well, I'll put it this way. You can totally make a crypto that's a security. Right? I can make a crypto tomorrow and say, buy this thing from me, and then I'm going to use your money to build it up and do all this crazy stuff. You know, I can make it a security if I want to make it a security. And there are a lot of people who have done that, and some have gotten in trouble and some have not. I think what we need, we need to like kind of step away from this, all crypto is by default a security. To me, a token that exists is just a thing, and sure, it is not tangible, and sure, it is dependent on this network of thousands of people to, make sure that it stays transferable and that you maintain your ownership, right? But at the end of the day, it's just a decentralized computer program that we're all taking part in, more or less. And to me, it's almost like a digital good. It's like crypto blockchain kind of brings to life this idea of like you can own something digitally. It's a method in which you can own something digitally but actually own it, right? Like if you download a video game, or you get some weapon in a video game or whatever, it's like, do you really own it? It's like you're just a record in some corporation's database. They say you own it. Like they want to go in there and say you don't own it anymore, they can, or they can turn the game off or whatever. But this is actually like crypto brings to light this like, oh, this is actually how you can own something digitally as close as possible. So to me, that makes it by default a commodity with the potential of being a security if certain things are done. But it's not the thing itself, it's the actions in which the person offering you the commodity is taking that might make it a security. Of course, these are my opinions, but it seems like that's the direction things are going. You look at the Ripple case, the token's not a security. It seems like the SEC is kind of getting beat down, like in a lot of ways, on a lot of their thoughts. So I think there's going to be, I think it will be positive, but it's probably going to get ugly before it gets positive, like for real. But the end goal, I think, is like, yes, we should have house deeds absolutely should be an NFT. Like, why is there a group of people in a county and a state with filing cabinets, and they're the repo of record, right? Like that's it, right? And sure, okay, they might have a website and some images scanned to a database, but like that's it. Like if I show up there and maybe I shave off my beard and I look a bit like somebody else, and I show up there with a deed and it's looks notarized, maybe it's forged or whatever, and say, hey, yeah, I'm and sold this house and here's the deed transfer, and they just record that. It's like, well, you can't do that in crypto, right? You've got to have the keys. So I think there are certain things in the world that absolutely today would be better if we could get past a lot of this regulatory clarity. And then also once you do that, then you have to get like the government on board, particularly with houses. So, that could take a long time, but some things could accelerate much faster and be better markets backed by a blockchain where there's less people in hands that everything has to go through.
Mm-hmm.
Well said. Thanks, Alex.
And just one thing on the regulation in terms of my students and projects. So I'd mentioned this in my last post, like some of my students are even looking into the SEC case against Richard Hart, partly from the securities perspective. Was this securities issuance? And I think, we've talked in class about the Howey test. What are the 4 characteristics of the Howey test? And so, I think it's a great opportunity for students to learn how do we define these things. And I think crypto really challenges some of those definitions. And so, my goal is to spend some more time over this next month to dig into that case and to understand both sides, and kind of, does this case become a bit of a precedent for helping establish some of these guidelines? So I think, regulatory clarity is something that everybody's looking for better or worse. And I think, Hex could help shine some light on that.
Definitely. And last question from the chat. 2017, during the ICO craze, there were several projects that tried to build things to bridge that gap between crypto and the real world, but the timing wasn't right and they were just rug pulls. So I wonder what elements would create success. Like, I mean, they're doing boxable homes. I suppose that's a bridge between TradFi and DeFi.
Yeah, I know there's some companies doing housing NFTs, but it's not. It's kind of the way that MERS is doing it. I don't know how familiar you guys are with MERS, but MERS is a company that basically, all the mortgage companies, they want super tradability of their securities. So what MERS will basically do is they will record the deed in MERS's name, or record the mortgage in MERS's name, and then through MERS, all the mortgage companies are able to trade internally because they don't actually have to re-record anything because that doesn't change. There are some companies trying to do that right now with houses, and they're trying to do it like in this private thing where it's like, okay, there's a trust and the trust owns all the houses and all this stuff. It's like, and maybe that's where you start. I know there've been projects who tried to like launch a stock on a blockchain. And almost all of those have either gotten sued into oblivion or they were rug pulls. So, yeah.
Do you know,
best of both worlds?
In a nod to our host, do you know the Australian Stock Exchange was one of those institutions that tried to do that? Did you know
No,
that?
I didn't know. No,
Yeah.
Was it successful or no?
No, they ended up giving up, but it was a pretty significant initiative.
I wonder why they gave up.
Heard about that.
I don't
think it was
Probably
to
true.
Alex's. I think it was to Alex's point. So I talked to my students about public blockchain versus private blockchain, and many of these they try and build their own private blockchain, and then they have to have all these governance structures, and it is a shared database, but it's not that different than existing databases. So I think it's fear of public blockchains that's really held that back.
I think people underestimate the power of a crypto community. And while we might have, we might be labeled in certain ways, which is sometimes are fair and sometimes aren't. And there are sections of the community, they might do the wrong thing, but the great proportion of the community might just be normal people. The power of the community is what drives decentralized finance. And I think in order for traditional finance and decentralized finance to come together on the blockchain, you do have to accept a certain level of degeneracy. And that just is what it is. Yeah, you can't control every user. It's because that's by definition.
Yeah, we have a lot less suits on the crypto community. We got a lot of flip flops and hey, what's up, DJ?
Magic internet money. Like the people behind that are going to be a little bit sometimes unsavory, but I'll add that I think there's a good chunk of people in crypto who actually don't want the marriage of the two. And they're the people who are not vocal, and they're the people who, are creating project after project, changing name. But the second any of this starts to become more legitimate and more regulated, this idea of, I can spin up a new thing and get all these people to like buy it and then dump on them and then change my name and run real fast and no one will find me. That becomes a lot harder when now there are much bigger players who care a lot more about these things involved. So I think there's a good chunk of people in crypto who don't want it to happen and will probably actively make crypto look worse to help ensure that it doesn't.
Mm-hmm. I will say, I think one avenue that a lot of this stuff could happen through, interestingly enough, could be like the gaming sphere, because like the integration between like crypto and then getting it over more into like, gaming still like online and on the computer, but it's not like in crypto. And so like the link between the two is so much closer than like crypto and real estate, where I think if we're going to start getting more like traditional companies using crypto in some way, I would imagine it being like gaming companies who want to tokenize the assets on the game that they're creating. That seems like the avenue with the least amount of resistance for like this to penetrate through like the rest of like TradFi.
Yeah.
Well, I'll give you a good example. Oh, sure. Go ahead.
And what?
Do you have a comment on like traditional finance and the integration?
I mean, in general, I think it's a good thing from what I've learned in class and like the different avenues. crypto can have in TradFi. I haven't heard much on the perspective to take that they want it to be so separate. But I think like from being in class and learning about the technology and really like the application side of crypto, it sounds like it can make like things in TradFi a lot more efficient, a lot less, I don't know, just so slow kind of. There's a lot of like slowness and fees involved in traditional finance. And it sounds like crypto can really like, I don't know, cut through that and like implement a technology where you don't need so many fees and it is more efficient.
Yeah, exactly.
You heard it
I mean,
here.
I think
Great point.
I think the SEC should, ultimately the viewpoint should be crypto is the best possible thing for transparency and like just being able to see everything. Like imagine all stocks were on a blockchain. You could know everyone's positions if you wanted to dig into it, find out who everyone is, but for the most part, what positions they have, whatever. Like you don't have that transparency in normal markets.
I want to add that
but-
in crypto, you can see everything. Kind of to expand on that, you can see on the blockchain, not necessarily who is what, but I mean, with the addresses, it's kind of more apparent to see a scam happening if you know how to read the blockchain. And in traditional finance, maybe not so much. And maybe people don't know as much about some of that, right? So crypto does get painted sometimes as a lot of scammers. There's people getting rugged, and it's like, well, but at least you can see what's going on. It's transparent. So
yeah, if you didn't, we would probably be shut down a long time ago.
right.
But
Yeah.
but I'll add to your thing, Sloth, that I think gaming is like, if you're gonna bridge the two worlds, gaming's the place to do it. I've looked into it. I've put some serious effort into figuring out, okay, how can you take a game like something like some kind of like MMO-esque game, give it a currency, make that a ERC, PRC20 or whatever, and all of its items are NFTs. And really, the complication is down to regulation. Because the second you start taking in money for a service and then giving them something of like potentially tangible financial value, it's like you're now arguably a money transmitter. So you're effectively asking all these gaming companies to be money transmitters. And then if that happens, well, now they have to go renegotiate all their contracts with their payment processors, half of which probably aren't qualified to do this for a money transmitter. So they'll just back out entirely. They have to redo their bank accounts. Like it's just, the reason no one is doing it is because of the amount of legal paperwork you have to go through to make something like that happen. Otherwise it would have happened. Like there's zero doubt in my mind that Activision wouldn't have saw the cash cow that could become and would have already done it. So
like just thinking of like so much, just think of like Roblox in of itself, like the Roblox, like it's a whole freaking ecosystem built on their own little currency that they just sell. And like if I were to, and there were some attempts to recreate it with like Sandbox and Decentraland and stuff, but like just like with the success that Roblox has had with like entire economies being run by like 12-year-olds and like all of it being run on this central currency that you can buy from the company. It's like this is exactly how I would envision like a metaverse type of system built on top of blockchain. It's just that like a central company it owns the currency and it doesn't have any value outside of its redeemability within the game. There's no like separate liquidity pools where you can go in and trade it and stuff like that for other assets and stuff. But like, yeah, like it's just me long-winded with saying like, I agree with you. Like everything's right there, but it's like all that regulatory uncertainty that we're talking about a little bit previously is just making it hard for people to make that jump.
So this question is for Chad. Chad, you're going to solve all my future problems. So Chad, this is my problem, and then I'll break it down in this question, and then this is just for your future self to solve this problem. So don't worry if your current self is thinking about it. So my general problem, one of my general problem with traditional finance is I get paid money, and then the government takes 50% of my money away from me. That breaks my heart a little bit. And then when I do other things with my money to try to make myself more money, every step of the way, I'm getting taxed. If I try to buy a house, tax in, tax out, every single tiny little step, I'm constantly getting taxed on the money that I've already paid tax for. And the way that I see traditional finance, one of the downsides is that it seems like a perpetual tax machine where I've gone to work, I've earned my money, I've paid so much tax up front. I feel like the government taking 45% of my tax, of my money that I've earned, is a lot, right? And then I'm taxed and taxed and taxed and taxed. So this question here, say if we used NFTs to buy a house, like say you use crypto to take out a loan, you use that loan to buy a house. The government wouldn't like that. And they wouldn't like it because they can't, if the house is owned by an NFT, they can't then, they don't have the control to tax me. So they wouldn't allow it. So that's where there's this conflict. So what are your thoughts, Chad?
Well, I mean, I couldn't tell you exactly what the tax implications would be for like real estate, but I mean, I think in general, your own government wouldn't allow there to just be this anonymous entity that buys something and doesn't pay tax, right? Because, you know, as you know, if you live in the U.S., it's like the IRS is going to get their money one way or another, and you know, all sort of tax vehicles that do that for them. You're not going to be able to get away with just buying a house and not paying tax.
I think your argument is fair, like you're presenting the fairness argument, but I'm presenting the same argument of fairness in that I feel like I've already paid my tax. Anyway, that's just me whinging about tax.
I mean, I think there are a lot of people in crypto now talking about the idea of like the network state. And, you know, there's a new book about that and kind of trying to like build this economy on the internet that does not have this geographic footprint in current nation states. But, you know, if we're going to do anything with real world assets that have a physical footprint, I think it's still going to be grounded within that geographic domain. So, you know, to do a house NFT, it would have to be part of the recorder of deeds in that local jurisdiction. They would have to be a participant in the blockchain. So I feel your pain, but I think that is one of the natures of TradFi.
All right, team, we're going to wrap it up. So we're going to do our outros. Sloth.
Yeah, so I'm Crypto Sloth. I'm a guy on the internet who talks about crypto. If you want to follow me, find me on Crypto Sloth on YouTube, Sloth Crypto 3 on Twitter. Class, thank you so much for having me on. It's always a pleasure. You do a great job hosting this stuff. Shout out to Chad for coming up on the stream, man. I appreciate that. I appreciate that a lot. It takes a lot to come out publicly and talk about this stuff, so I appreciate it. And if you ever want to talk with me, if you want to do a one-on-one with me on my stream, just reach out, DM me on Twitter, man, and we can set it up. Dr. Black, great to talk to you again, man. I would love to set up another stream with you at some point. I think we could have a fun conversation.
I'm on 3. You're on 2, Sloth. How many streams have you had with Professor?
1.
Sorry, you can throw that back in my face, man. Your numbers are way higher than me. Thanks, Sloth. I really enjoyed your contribution to the show today. Thank you. So Chad and Professor Lamont, it's your chance for an outro. So you get to say whatever you haven't said, and then you might not have a social media presence, so that's cool. You don't have to get into the degen land just yet. But yeah, we appreciate you coming here. That's for sure.
Yeah, I don't really I don't really have social media, so nothing shout out there. But I just wanted to thank you, Claz, for putting together, you know, the pilot program with all the Hex and Pulse and all the people in the Hex community that made that possible, whoever they are. But thank you for that, and speak for the class when they say thank you. And yeah, just great being on.
Oh, you're welcome.
I don't have much to add to that. I'm so glad that Chad did this. I'm so glad for what the experience the students had. So like he said, thank you, Claz, for organizing that pilot program. And thank you to all the people who donated to help make that possible. And really, it's been an awesome opportunity for the students. And I've really enjoyed my role in the community as well. So I look forward to continuing the conversation.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. It's my pleasure. Alex.
Yeah, I mean, you guys all know where to find me. I don't need to tell you guys that one. But
Alex is like, I got enough fans. Don't at me.
But yeah, I appreciate you putting this together. It's been great. You know, I want to add one quick thing. You know, taxes are a set of rules. the one thing blockchain can do is you can figure out how to use rules to your advantage. You can do that in, TradFi too, but blockchain has some more flexibility. So, people should invent more things to, accurately and play by the rules, but also reduce taxes. That's what big corporations do all the time. But yeah, Icosa Hedron V2, hopefully soon. Still working on some kinks, but testnet's coming up.
Awesome news. Thanks, Alex. I've really enjoyed your contribution. I'm so grateful that you came on the show. And I think, that's what it's all about. Like we want to be legitimate. We want to do the right thing. We want to pay our taxes, but we feel that I'll speak for myself, that obviously people that are in the higher echelons of wealth or in the corporate world have more advantage over the everyday person. So we are trying to level up. And that's the reason probably why I went into crypto, because I exhausted traditional finance methods of having generational wealth. So yeah, it's a work in progress, definitely. HodPro.
I am HodPro on Twitter and HodPro on Telegram. So I'm constantly looking at different crypto things. Don't be patient with yourself if you don't ever understand everything at first. You're not supposed to know everything at the end of a stream. You're supposed to get the general rules, and then do a lot of research. And I suggest that you do a lot of research. And I'm probably on Twitter mostly, but if you have any questions about crypto or how to get into it, feel free to contact me, and I'll show you where you can look some of the stuff up. So,
thank you, HodPro. Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.
And thanks, chat. It's been a really great stream. All right, until next time. See ya.
Thanks, everyone.
Yeah.